So welcome. Thank you all for being interested in listening to just a brief introduction on the legislative process. So my name is Kayla Bell Consalver, she, her pronouns, and I'm the president of the Iowa Mental Health Counseling Association. And today I have Emily Piper with us to kind of guide us a little bit through a little more information about the legislative process, how to get involved, just information that we may not know. So Emily, I'll give you the floor to introduce yourself a little bit.
Oh, thanks, Kayla. I really appreciate it. I'm Emily Piper, and I am your contract lobbyist. I've been doing this at the State House for over 20 years. Prior to that, I also worked for an organization doing basically the same kind of thing, both state and federal lobbying. So I have a lot of experience in how the process works, and I'm really excited to be working with IMCA members and helping to further your profession.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Emily. So let's just jump right into it. How would you describe your role as a lobbyist for IMCA?
So, a lobbyist is really kind of the connection between the members and the legislature. So my job is to take the issues and the concerns and the ideas that you raise and present them to legislators and ask them to take action on them. So I'm there every day watching out for your interest, watching what is being introduced, looking for opportunities. We may propose legislation, we may be trying to defeat legislation, but my job is really to take the pressure off of you as volunteer members of an association who have full-time jobs of your own to understand what's going on and to influence the process to the benefit of your profession.
Right. Yes. Thank you for that. And so we know the legislative process and understanding that can be really confusing for many people. And so can you describe a little bit more about what the legislative code is, or just how members or counselors are able to access information on legislation?
Right. So a couple of things. First, I just want to point out that the legislative session runs every year, generally from the second Monday in January through about the middle to late April. So in an election year, the legislature meets for 100 days, and in a non-election year, they meet for 110 days. Now, that doesn't mean they actually get done on time, but that's kind of the schedule. So it's a very compressed 4.5 month schedule. It's really easy to find information about what goes on legislatively. You can go to the Iowa Legislative website, and I know that IMCA has a handbook guide put together that explains how to do that. And you can find what bills are being introduced. You can find out what committees and subcommittees are going on that day. You can access the Iowa Code, which is what basically the law that explains everything that governs the profession. You can find your legislators. So it's really chock full of good information, and I would encourage folks to take a look at that, particularly if you have a real interest in the legislative process and want to see what's going on. One of the really nice things that came out of the COVID pandemic, and not many people can say a good thing came out of that, but is the legislature became a lot more accessible to members of the public for both committee meetings as well as subcommittee meetings. So it used to be that we just met in person. Now they actually provide virtual links. The Senate uses Zoom and the House uses WebEx, which is odd that they don't use the same thing, but whatever. And so you're actually able to watch subcommittees and committees so that you can hear some of that debate. Prior to 2020, when we came back in June after they shut down for a while, the only way you could actually see committees and subcommittees is if you attended in person. So I think this is a really good improvement. For instance, if there's a bill that you have a big interest in, you can click on and watch it. The Senate also allows people to participate in subcommittees virtually. So the House doesn't, but the Senate does. So let's say there's a bill to talk about a licensure issue that is really important to IMCA members. If you have the time, you can get on that subcommittee and you can provide input. It really is a great improvement to the process, because it means real people like all of you don't have to take a lot of time out of your day, cancel clients, things like that, to be able to participate in the legislative process.
Right. And then you get to hear how things are happening in real time.
Right, right. And it's, I think the thing that your members might find the most interesting is just listening to some of the back and forth, listening to what do different groups have to say, what are legislators have to say. The same is true if you watch a committee meeting. So most of our bills go through the Human Resources Committee in the House and the Senate. Listening in on that committee, you get a flavor for where people are at. Why do they think this is important? What kind of concerns or questions do they have? So it's a really nice improvement to help the public at large get engaged.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just echo that. We also have that in Iowa for the Iowa Board of Behavioral Sciences meetings
Yep.
are held virtually as well. And so those are quarterly. So it's the same opportunity on the state level as well. So thank you, Emily, for speaking to that. Can you also speak a little bit about why that's important, specifically for us counselors to be actively involved in that level?
Well, you know why it's important? Because I'm a hired gun. You know what? I am not a practicing mental health counselor. I did not go to school for that.
Mhm.
I know the issues because you guys help me understand and learn them, but I don't have the real world impact. Each of you are the ones that are out there seeing the challenges, seeing the barriers, seeing the issues that need to be addressed. And legislators really value having that real world impact so they can better understand it. So, for instance, telling your story. If you are, one of the things that we're working on this year is a loan repayment program to help entice people to practice in certain areas by getting some state money to repay their student loan debt. Well, if you're a student and you're close to graduation and you're thinking about where am I going to practice and how am I going to make that work, your story about why you chose counseling, what kind of debt you've incurred, why you want to practice in a certain area, that helps advance our agenda, because your story is something that I can't tell. I can explain to legislators, hey, this is the impact of this code, but I can't explain it in the same way that you can as to this is what it means for me and my clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Becomes more personable.
Right, right. I think anytime you can make it a personal story and share what it really means in a practical sense, that helps legislators understand. They may not always listen, but you've at least been able to express an opinion that says, this is what it means for me.
Right, absolutely. So let's say there is legislation that's recommended and counselors are impacted by that change that's being recommended. What should they do? What would you encourage them to do?
Yeah, the first thing I would encourage them to do is reach out to their own legislators. So again, with the IMCA legislative guide, it does have a link that talks about how you find your legislator and how you find their contact information. Is reach out to them and say, there's this bill that I have an interest, a concern about, or I think this is a really good idea. One of the things that I always tell all of my clients when you're contacting your legislator, make sure you tell them you're a constituent. Give them your name, your address, let them know that you are a constituent, and put that in the subject line. And the reason is legislators get so many emails from so many different people. They prioritize responding to their constituents. So reaching out to your constituent, your legislator, is the most important thing you can do. The other thing you can do is if you have personal relationships because you know somebody through another professional avenue, or you were in college together and you have a relationship with them, even if they're not your legislator, is utilize that relationship. Lobbying and being involved in the legislative process, it's a relationship business. It's exactly what you guys already do. You're about relationships. Well, it's the same thing. So you just take that a step further. Also, I would encourage you to get others activated. Like if you know that this issue could have a negative impact on the profession, make sure you're reaching out to your peers and your colleagues and saying, hey, did you know this was happening? You should contact your legislator and let them know why we're concerned about this.
Yes, and thank you for speaking to that and using our language. I think anyone listening that's a counselor would echo that relationships are important for us. And I like how we're translating that also in this area.
Right. It's exactly the same thing. It's all about relationships.
Yes. And so for anyone that's really curious and trying to navigate the website, at the bottom of this video in the bio, you will see that I will include the link and information. So that way you'll be able to find the legislator in your district, as well as notify the way or explore the ways to contact them as well. So speaking of legislation, talking to senators, et cetera, we are having our Day on the Hill coming up. And so can you speak a little bit about what Day on the Hill is and like why that's important?
So it's really important. I can't stress it enough. So it is March 7th, and we will be doing a briefing before heading to the Capitol. And that briefing will include not just talking about the issues, but helping you get a little comfort level about going up there. Because if you're not familiar with the process and you haven't done it before, it can be a little intimidating. But you know why it's important is when you take time away from your clients, when you make time to go up there, legislators recognize that. They understand that and they know that you feel this is really important. And no one can tell your story better than you. This is that opportunity to really be face to face with legislators to say, here's what is important in our profession, and here's what we need to make it even stronger. And the thing that I would tell folks is don't be nervous about it. Legislators are just like everyone else. You know what? They go to church, they take their kids to school, they go grocery shopping. They're not any different than you. They're your neighbors, essentially. Think of them like that. So the fact that they decided to run for election and were elected puts them a little bit aside from the normal person because that's not something for everybody, but they really are just average people. Iowa has what's called a part-time legislature. That means legislators are not they're not paid as if they are full-time. So almost every single one of them has another job. They're just average citizens who felt the call to come and serve in the Iowa legislature. But coming up on that day is so good because number one, it shows that, it helps put a brand, an identity on the profession. They can say, you know what, it's not just a mental health counselor. Now I know Kayla, who is a mental health counselor, and I've heard her story. It gives you an opportunity to really talk one-on-one with them in a way that you may not have otherwise. And so I love having clients come up and do Days on the Hill because I just think it helps reinforce the message that I'm sending. So when I talk on your behalf, it's nice to know that they've now heard directly from those of you practicing in the field, and they can say, well, yes, Emily told us that. Now I really understand where she's getting this information from.
Right, absolutely. And it helps to, I hear you saying, like really create a relationship. One that
Right,
might be
it
really
does.
hard to navigate if you're just reading an email or answering by phone, et
Right.
cetera.
So what I always think, Kayla, like one of the goals of a Day on the Hill, or if you come up and work with your legislator, or even just contact them and meet with them back at home, is you want to be the source of their information. You want them to say, you know what, I'm thinking about this, or I saw this. I wonder how it would affect Kayla. So you want them to think of you before they start making decisions about how they're going to move down the road with a specific piece of legislation. And that's, as you know, relationships are best developed in person.
Right, absolutely. I love the way you explain that because that is true. Because at this moment now we have a name to a face, and because it's more
Right.
personable, that's going to shift
Yep.
how we view things and reflect on them.
Right. And they know your story, and they feel comfortable reaching out to you, just like you feel more comfortable reaching out to them.
Right, absolutely. Yes, thank you to speaking on that. And so as we get towards the end, I'm curious what recommendations you might have for counselors or even student counselors that are just wanting to become a little bit more involved or informed, and we're starting at ground level.
So I think there's a couple of things. Number one, I know IMCA does a really good job of putting legislative information on their website, on their Facebook page, is, really make it a priority to look for that information. Number two, spend some time getting to know what the legislative website looks like and reach out to your legislator. Even if there's not a specific issue, reach out to your legislator and say, I'd love to have coffee with you and talk about what I'm doing in the mental health field, or what I hope to accomplish if you're a student going into the profession. And number three, well, obviously show up for the Day on the Hill. That is a really great introduction to the process. And you're not alone. You're there with all of your peers. So you're not, you're not just kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool. You're having, you've got a group kind of support system as you go and learn the process. And lastly, I know IMCA is always looking for folks that want to be engaged with the legislative committee, and that committee really decides like what are the priority issues. They review legislation, they seek feedback from members to try to decide what is our position going to be. And that's a really great way to get involved, because that really is about the future of the profession and I'll just give an example. We've had a couple of bills where the legislative committee has reviewed them to provide feedback. One is about merging the Board of Behavioral Science with the Board of Social Work. And while I don't think anybody was opposed to it, that feedback generated a lot of really good questions about how does that work? What does it mean for me? And how does this move forward? So it's a great way to be involved. But I would really start with follow IMCA on Facebook and follow their legislative issues, and then reach out to your local legislators and invite them to have coffee and discuss the issues.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just add to that, to also join IMCA, because our members get first access to this information. So what Emily spoke to about the boards merging, we made sure we sent that directly to our members to get feedback from them. So it's a great opportunity just for you to get more access to that as well. And so in closing, is there any other advice that you might give to a counselor or a student counselor that's just learning about the legislative process?
So yeah, Kayla, I really appreciate that question. What I would really say is the legislators aren't experts. You're the expert. You understand how things work. So recognize that they want to learn the issues and that you have that knowledge, and talk to them in real world terms. You know, if it's a reimbursement issue, talk about how that impacts your ability to serve clients. If it's a licensing issue, talk about why you think the licensing process works or doesn't work. Help them understand what you went through in terms of education and what your scope of practice is. You know, legislators talk vaguely about mental health, but they don't understand what the mid-level mental health providers, the non-prescribers, so the social workers, the marriage and family therapists, and the mental health counselors, they don't really understand what it is you do. Help them understand that. Once you build that relationship and they have a better understanding, it helps me when I work directly with them, and B, I really do think that it will set the stage for them to come talk to you and say, what do you think of this idea? Or would this help you in your practice?
Right. Absolutely. I love that. And I'll just add, as someone that was also in a process eventually trying to learn more about this, is to ask more questions, right? That's why we're even doing this even now, so we can ask those questions, get more answers. Do not feel like you should know everything, because everyone has a starting point. And so, Emily, again, thank you for all you're doing for IMCA. I appreciate you taking the time with me today just to be able to give back to our members and other counselors. And so if anyone—
thank you so much, Kayla. Look forward to seeing everybody on March 7th.
Yes. All right. Have a great day.
Thanks.